Sometimes we take photos and they don't come out exactly the way that we expect them to, and that's where post-production comes in handy. Today, we're going to take the photo from looking like this to looking like this using tools found inside of ON1 Photo RAW. I'm also going to talk you through my reasoning for using the tools and how we correct certain things. So if you're ready to go, stay tuned and let's jump in. Here we are inside of ON1 Photo RAW 2026, and you can see the image is very gray, very flat, and it's also missing a lot of color. So we have to work with each of those things independently of one another, and that's kind of the crux of today's video. So I'm going to go through the basic exposure adjustments relatively quick, but if you got questions, leave it in the comment section below. Now, and of course, if you want to follow along, you can download this file using the link in the description box below as well. So what we're going to do is start over here with tone and color. I could start with Brilliance AI, and in fact, let's just click it to see what it gives us. And so this is what Brilliance AI has done. I'm going to hold the backslash key. This is before, and this is after. Not quite what I'm going for in this particular photo. So that's the reason why I'm not using Brilliance AI. And yes, you can come in here and you could pull this slider. And honestly, that doesn't look too bad for just a very basic edit overall. And you could probably start from this point, but I want to show you how to do this manually so you can really have control, because you'll learn that over time, when you start doing edits on images like this, you're going to want to know exactly what happened and make deliberate decisions on what each slider is going to do. So we'll start off with tone and color. And typically I would say, let's change our camera profile. But I do know that for this particular photo, ON1 standard is probably the better starting point. You can experiment, when you have this file, but I'm going to leave it set to ON1 standard. And I'm going to jump straight down to saturation because there's not much color in this image already. And so I want to see what the basic tonal contrast range looks like. So if I pull this all the way down, you can see, it's very gray, very flat, nothing flattering. So we should probably work with this. Now, before I start tweaking any of this, I'm going to pull up our histogram. And this now shows me where our tonal ranges are. And then I'm also going to turn on the clipping indicators. And right now, we're just clipping in the highlights, which I can probably work and bring that back. So let's go ahead and jump up here to the tone adjustment. And the first thing that I want to do is probably just pull back on the whites. Let's just recover, and maybe not. The whites aren't really doing much there. So let's just go ahead and pull back on the exposure. And I don't need to get rid of all of this clipping because I can use a local adjustment to correct some of that, or I can always crop the image. So you don't always need to get rid of every single overexposed aspect. All right. And then there's also another trick that you could use with the curves, but I don't recommend that. All right. And then the next thing that I need to do is really start to build this contrast. So the way that I want to approach this image is I want to make the blacks a little bit blacker. I want to get my black point established because I have a little bit of wiggle room between the far left point and the darkest pixel in the image. So I want to recover that and see what we can do. So I'm just going to go ahead and pull down on the black point, and you can see some shadows starting to creep in here at the bottom, but I'm not going to worry about those particular shadows down here at the bottom. I'm just going to keep going because if it's only at the bottom of the frame, again, I can deal with that with a crop, or I can use a radial gradient or some other adjustment local and get rid of those issues. So I'm really looking at the entire photo as I pull the black slider down. And so I think that's a relatively safe black point. I'm getting some pretty deep contrast in the overall photo. So now it's time to work with the shadows. I know that in this photo, pulling up on the shadows is just going to reintroduce that gray. So I will probably just pull the shadow point down to the left. And so what that tells me is I need to separate the brightest points from those middle gray looking areas. And that's kind of where the midtones come in. So I want my midtones to probably be a little bit brighter. And as I increase the midtones, I'm realizing I need to decrease my shadows just a little bit further. And I also may need to increase the highlights, but I don't want to go too crazy because remember, I'm already blowing out some information there. So don't want to go too crazy, maybe just a little bit. And we'll increase the whites just to get that separation, because right now we have these really dark rocks in the foreground, which is fine. And we have some brightness in the sky, but it's not really separated well. And one of the ways of separating things in a photo is with the luminosity values or the brightness values. So things that are bright against things that are dark, that's how you build contrast. That brings me to the contrast slider. I'm just going to go ahead and pull this over to the right, and you can see those rocks in the foreground really get crushed here. But again, I'm not worried about those because I can fix that later. So I think that this will satisfy the need. Now, I'm also losing detail in this little area right here, which there were some birds on it. I don't know if I want that to be silhouetted or not. I'll make that decision a little bit later. But I do know that I'm losing detail in that area because it's just pure black. So as of right now, it is silhouetted, and that may or may not be what you're going for. And then I noticed that when I made that adjustment to the contrast, I also started to get more of these bright spots. So I'm going to need to do something with the sky in order to modify that brightness. So before I jump into reinstating the color to this image, I'm just going to come over to local and start working with some of these problem areas. The first one is definitely going to be that sky. So I'm just going to hit the plus icon. I'm going to grab a gradient tool because this to me just seems to be the easiest way of dealing with those types of issues. And then I am going to figure out why. There we go. I don't know why it turned off. So I'm just going to go ahead and pull down on the exposure just a little bit because I don't think I need a whole lot to clean up these areas that I was concerned with. And then I'll just rotate this around and you can see how that's already starting to clean up those areas. I'll pull this in a little bit tighter so we get 100% above the line, and I'll pull this down as well. So I just need to clean up these really small spots. I don't even know if they're coming through, but these little areas right here. Now, a way that you can clean those up is you could just use a brush and paint over those areas and, really just fine tune, erase that. But I'm going to try pulling down on the highlights, and that does a pretty decent job, but I don't like what it's doing to the whole image there. So I'm just going to pull down a little bit more on the exposure, and I think that that's good. So the next step is coming up with some form of fixing this issue in the top right corner. Well, I'm just going to use another exposure adjustment, linear gradient, and we will rotate this one. Again, I'm not entirely sure why this keeps turning off our clipping indicators, but that is okay because we can just turn them back on. And then I'll just pull down on the exposure again, and I'll pull this up into that corner. And don't worry, I'll show you how to clean this up because right now this is really messing up that corner area. And so I'm just going to pull this down, and I think to about there is probably going to be just about right. And this was probably shot overexposed anyway. And so this is the challenge of trying to recover things that just don't exist, right? And again, another option is I can come into effects, add a curves adjustment filter, turn the clipping indicator back on, and watch this red section. If I just pull this down, that's now gone away. Now, the challenge here is you may not like the result when it's printed. And I don't plan to print this particular photo, but you know, if you run into challenging situations like that, it's better to cut it out. But if you can't cut it out, then this could be an opportunity to fix that issue. So we'll just call that good for today's purposes. And let me just get rid of this one because I don't need it anymore. And honestly, I may not even need this one. Yeah, I don't think I need this particular adjustment anymore for the darkening of the sky. But we'll leave it on. And if it's too harsh, then I'll just take it off. So we'll jump back over to develop. And there's two things that I want to do here in develop. First one is I want to increase the structure because this was a raw image. So I'm just going to pull that up. And I think right now what we're seeing is the sky being really, really dark. But again, that's coming from that local adjustment that we can turn off. So it's just messing with my perception of how well I worked with the tones. Nonetheless, we'll grab the saturation tool here and we will pull up on the saturation, reintroducing the color into the image up to a point where we believe that it feels good. And, you know, I think this is about right because of the way that we modified the sky. We're getting this really weird and harsh transition. I don't really care for that. So let's go back to local, turn that off. And now we have a more fluid transition there. So coming back over to develop, we're going to go ahead and increase the magentas just a little bit. And I'm going to turn off the clipping mask because I don't really care so much about this anymore in the foreground. I get it. This is mostly black and that's fine. So with that being said, now we can start to work with the white balance, which is important here. And I think magentas can get pushed a little bit, and then I'll pull the temperature slider left and right until I find a medium, a happy spot. Now you would think the vibrant slider is the slider that you want to increase, and this could work, but there's a better way to work with the color issue that we're having here. All right. So I'm just going to double click to reset the vibrant slider. I do want to increase the saturation because I need more color to work with in order for the next step in the process to work the way that I would hope for it to. Now, I'm also seeing that the colors are a little muddy and things are a little too dark. So I am going to increase the midtones, pull the shadows back down so we get some more contrast, and then pull the contrast slider as well. And all I'm doing here is just trying to balance the luminance values across the entire image. And I knew that I needed to pull up on the exposure. So I was setting other aspects of my tonal adjustments to give me that flexibility. That's all that I was doing there. So now that we have that going, hold down J, and we're not clipping in the brightest areas. So we're good to go. Now it's time to work with the colors specifically. And if you caught any of my color videos, then you probably already know I'm going to go ahead and grab a color editor. All right. The color editor is a great tool because it allows you to really pinpoint the colors that you want to work with. And you'll notice that all of the orange and red and magenta colors are really right around in this area. So I'm going to grab the eye picker tool and I'm just going to grab a color that's right in this area. I may actually resample that. Let's go here. And then if you want to see the color that you're actually working with, if you come over to the right here, you can click these glasses and it desaturates the photo everywhere except for the place where you're working with the color. And so now what I can do is see what this image really looks like when I sample just that color. And, you know, I really like this effect. You know, if you want to do this effect, I could show you that. Just comment down below and I'll make a separate video. But nonetheless, what I need to do now is I want to look at it across the entire image. The only reason these glasses exist is so you are paying attention to the color that you're going to impact. That's all. So turn off the glasses, and now I can work with the hue of just that color. And this is for like very, very specific and particular adjustments. And that's the point of using the color editor. And then I can increase the saturation. And for me, this is the place where I want to do exactly that. Now, I could work with the luminance value of that color, maybe make it just a touch brighter, but you start to get like these weird looking bands, and it's not entirely perceivable, but it is something that I've noticed. So I would caution not going overboard with this. Just, fine tune this to your heart's content. Your image may require something a little bit different than what I'm doing here for this particular photo, but just something to keep in mind. And so if I turn this off and turn it back on, you can see it brings that saturation, and it's just enough saturation to make the image look good, but not overly saturating the image to the point where it looks bad. Now you're probably wondering, like, well, Chris, why didn't you just use the color enhancer or color mixer? And the reason for that is the color enhancer, which is one of my favorite color tools, it doesn't really allow me to fine tune exactly the color range that I want to work with. I get these channels, and then you get this range slider, and yes, it's going to give you the oranges, but look at how much it starts to bleed into these other areas when you make these adjustments. And then if you fine tune the range, it's barely coming out of those areas. Whereas with the color editor, I have a little bit more flexibility. Now, that's not to say you can't use the color enhancer to improve the colors, because that's exactly what I'm about to do. So what I'm going to do is I am going to like crazy increase the saturation just so I can see where I'm working. And then I'm just going to work with the range slider here until I pull it down just enough to where it's only covering the center portion or centermost portion of the oranges, and then fading off into the less saturated areas. And that's kind of what the range slider does here. And I have a video about this, so I'll leave a link to it in the description box if you got questions about that, or if you're curious. And so now I will reset the saturation and just dial this in to a point where it really makes sense for this particular image. And then of course, if I want to move around the hue, maybe I want it to be a little bit leaning towards red, then I can do that. And maybe I want to come to the yellows, and I'll do the same thing. But there's very little yellow in this image, so I'm not going to really mess with those now that I've started to look at it. And then let's see if there's anything in the reds. So the reds, if I saturate this, it really does do a lot. And if you want to go for a less saturated look, you could just pull the saturation back as well. I don't want to do that because I want to bring more color into the image. So maybe something like so. And then I want to keep the magenta look in the overall image. And then I'll pull down on the range, so that way it's not impacting every single red that ON1 is discovering. All right. And then I'll do the same thing with the magenta channel, and let's just increase the saturation here. It's not really doing much of anything, so we'll leave that be. Let's jump over to the blue channel and play around with the saturation here. We could probably even pull the luminance down and up. Yeah, if we pull it down, we start to silhouette this horizon line here, and I like what that's doing. So I'll let that go. And I don't think we're going to get much out of the aqua. So we'll just leave that be. All is well. So let's turn off the color enhancer. and then turn it back on. And you can see how it's just helping to bring out some more colors in the image. I do think that it is a little too strong. So we'll come to opacity, pull it all the way down, and then I just like to dial it up. I'm not worried about the number on the opacity slider as much as I am just looking at the image. And so I think that that looks pretty good there. And so now what I think this image really needs is some sort of attention grabber. Like, I'm okay with this staying in silhouette, but I need some sort of an attention grabber. And because I've darkened everything else down, the light is really bright up here, but I want the attention to really be around here. That tells me I need to apply a local adjustment and increase the exposure in that area. So I'm going to go with local, and I guess we could just reuse this one. So we'll just reset this. And in fact, maybe we won't just reuse it. We will use this to darken down the sky. And let me get my gradient mask, and we will pull this a little bit further down like so. So that way, I just want to put this like right over the horizon. Yeah, like that. That'll be all right. And so what that did, if you look over in this upper left area, it made that area less attention grabbing, and it's going to allow for the color and brightness to really shine through when we add that here. So let's go ahead and hit more. We're going to add a gradient. And I really do love working with gradient filters or gradient masks. They're one of my favorite filters to work with. So we'll go with a center filter, and that's just going to apply the adjustment in the middle of the gradient, which is what we want. And I'm just going to position that over here. We will increase the exposure, and a little does go a long way with this type of adjustment, because remember, we darken the entire image. And so you don't need to do a whole lot. I will warm it up just a little bit, and you got to be careful with these, the points. I would love to see a different measurement or increment for the temperature here, but I'm just gonna type this in, make it a 1, because I do want it to be a little bit more warm. But as you've seen, a number 4 goes way more warm than I think is appropriate for this photo. And then I'll also increase the magenta, which ironically, this is a more subtle adjustment than the temperature slider. So not sure exactly how that's working, but it is what it is. And now that I have that a little bit brighter, as well as a little bit warmer, maybe we can throw in some vibrance just to make that area really stand out a little bit more. Now, it does look pretty obvious that we did that because it's not the same shape as the clouds in this area. So I'm going to shrink this in, position it up a little bit higher, and then feather this out a little bit further. And so now it's a very subtle adjustment, but it does help bring your attention into this area and away from this area. And that's the only reason why I'm doing it. And then what you can also do is increase the structure in just this area. It's not going to look the greatest if you go too far. Like if you just crank that structure all the way up, you can see these clouds look really crunchy. And to me, that just doesn't look natural. But if you give it a little bit more texture than everything else, things with more texture in a photo get looked at, and it's easier for our eye to pick that out. So I think that that's good. I think I'll do 2 more things to this photo and then we'll be done with it. So let's go to effects, and we're going to add in a glow. This is one of my favorite filters to put over images like this, because I think that it does look good. So we'll just increase a glow just a little bit there, play with the haloing, and maybe right around there, maybe even increase the glow a little bit more. And then of course, I like to dial it back and then dial it in. somewhere around there looks pretty good. So if I turn this off and turn it back on, you can see exactly what it's doing there. And then the last thing that I'll do is add a vignette. I'm just going to go with a big softy because that is a classic. So just click on styles and then big softy. This is something that's been in ON1 for a very long time. This is very strong. So the first thing I like to do is just pull down the feather, figure out where the size is, and then I'll make it a little bit wider. And then I'll pull the feather all the way back up. And then I pull the opacity down and then fade it back in until it gets to a point where I'm comfortable. And I think that that's about right. So if I turn this off and turn back on, you can see it just kind of focuses the eye just a little bit more. And you could play with this so much more and do so many other things, but that's kind of just where I wanted to leave it. So here is the before, what we came into ON1 Photo RAW with, straight out of camera, probably could have been shot a lot better. And here is the final version of the image after all of the edits that have been done. Hopefully you found value in today's content. If you did, you already know what to do. Engage with this video as much as you can. Now, if you want to learn how to use ON1 Photo RAW and you want me to instruct you step by step, consider signing up for a training call with me. A link for that can be found in the description box below. If you want to pick up ON1 Photo RAW, save a little bit of money in the process, consider using my affiliate coupon code FreeWillPhotos20. It'll save you some money at checkout and I make a small commission. It's a win-win, but also a great way of supporting the channel. Until next time, I want you to stay inspired and keep creating. Peace.